Welcome back to another episode of Are You Ready with Joanne Molinaro, where we talk about how to get ready to live a more purposeful and empowered life. This week, I'd like to introduce you to Eric Kim, author of the instant New York Times bestselling cookbook, Korean American, columnist at the New York Times Cooking Desk, ASMR YouTube pioneer, and former up-and-coming pop star. But before we do that, just a few words from our sponsor, me. We do not have ads on this podcast yet, but I did want to spend a couple minutes mentioning my recipe app, the Korean Vegan Collective. If you're looking to up your plant-based nutrition game, but you're just not sure where to start, check out the Korean Vegan Collective, my online library of literally thousands of plant-based recipes that are designed to make your move towards a healthier, plant-forward future as easy and convenient as possible. Anthony and I, plus our amazing team at the Korean Vegan Collective, have worked incredibly hard to create this amazing resource, which in addition to unlocking all of my delicious recipes, also provides you with the following: complete nutritional information for every single recipe, integrated grocery shopping lists and grocery delivery in most metropolitan areas, access to unlimited one-on-one food coaching, and exclusive articles and videos from me and my team. And I do mean exclusive. You're not going to find these things anywhere else. You get all of this for as little as $1.90 per week. When you sign up at meals.thekoreanvegan.com, you'll be invited to input like a host of personal preferences that will help customize your recipes. These include skill level, how much time you have to cook, and just about all the food allergies you can imagine. The Korean Vegan Collective is a powerful resource that I'm super proud of. To check it out, look for the link in the show notes below, visit my website, or just go to meals.thekoreanvegan.com. I was introduced to Eric through one of his essays. In fact, his very first piece for the New York Times, Kimchi is a Verb. As I've discussed in a prior podcast episode, kimchi is more than just pickled cabbage to most Koreans and Korean Americans. I mean this literally, of course, since as Eric's piece does such a good job of demonstrating, kimchi can signify several different kinds of vegetables, not just Napa cabbage, and flavors, not just spicy red pepper. But it's so much more than just that there are hundreds of different kinds of kimchi out there. It reminded me of how my mother would look at the large, round, purple radishes nestled together in wooden crates at our local farmer's market and immediately wonder out loud, I wonder if I could make kimchi out of that. I was thus so heartened to see another Korean American writer who viewed kimchi as not just within the confines of a specific food, but as dynamic and adaptable as the hands that have salted, pasted, and packed kimchi for hundreds of years. Notwithstanding Eric's very thoughtful essay on this topic, as you'll hear in this week's interview, the feedback to Eric's article was not just instant, but negative. Another Korean American food writer wrote to Eric's editor, i.e. his boss, claiming that the article was riddled with errors. Eric would soon learn that this was, unfortunately, a part of the job, navigating the often unsettled waters of representation. What representation means, looks like, and effectuates are not as black and white as the words printed on a newspaper, however much some might wish it were. The concept of adequate representation may not always be aligned with fair representation. Sometimes, I worry that we've been suffocating under the cloak of invisibility for so long, we'll do anything, say anything, be anything, for even the possibility of being seen. Food is, of course, a vehicle for all sorts of discourse, including political discourse. I'll bet you all can recall one too many uncomfortable conversations at Thanksgiving or Aunt Helen's birthday where Uncle Rich got a little bit loud about something he saw on Fox News or read in the local paper. And as Senator Cory Booker delves into during his recent conversation with Rich Roll, food is itself a subject of policy, legislation, and ginormous lobbying dollars. But what about the politics of identity? who we are as individuals that form a nation, how we relate to each other today versus how we aspire to see each other tomorrow. At bottom, politics is about power. And power has historically been about defining those who have and those who have not on the premise that there isn't enough for everyone. But what if this is a lie? What if we start believing that there's plenty for all of us? Well, Eric, again, what serendipity to be seeing you this afternoon, so shortly after our tteokbokki collision.
Welcome to my kitchen.
Thank you. This kitchen is amazing. I love our setup here. For those of you who are listening, I'm in Eric's kitchen in New York City. Typical New York City kitchen, charming but very small. And I, in true Joanne fashion, forgot to bring the tripods for the microphones. So they are now leaning on stacks of Eric's books.
Yeah, books that I forgot I had.
So appropriate since Eric is a writer for the New York Times. How long have you been writing with the New York Times?
My 2-year anniversary was a few days ago, actually.
Oh, wow. What did you do to celebrate?
Nothing. I called I FaceTimed my colleague, my counterpart, Iwande Kamalafe. She's great. And we sort of just like shot the breeze a little bit.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, we're gonna have lunch sometime soon.
Oh, that's good. That's good. You can consider our tteokbokki lunch today a celebration of your 2-year anniversary.
It's really crazy though, because like it feels like it's been 3 years, but it's. I was checking the calendar.
Well, I think COVID has messed with so many people's framing of time. Either it feels so extra long or it feels like it didn't happen.
Yeah. This keeps happening to me where I think back on a memory and I think it was last year, but I realize it was 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
exactly.
that was 3 years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah. So 3 years ago, that means you would have started right at the beginning of the pandemic. Is that right?
I did. Right at the start of the pandemic, I was laid off from my job at the time at 52. And then, by the way, they also rehired that same position 2 months later, and then laid that person off again, like a year later.
There's a story there.
There's a story there. No, but it was great because I also just got the book deal, so I had all this time to write it. But that seems so long ago, and it kind of was. It was 2020.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to writing during the pandemic, especially for the New York Times. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about Atlanta and growing up in Atlanta.
Okay.
That's where you grew up, right?
Yeah. I've had this new thing happen to me lately. Usually when I go home to Atlanta, it feels really lovely, and I still love Atlanta, but for the first time in 12 years, I actually prefer New York now. It's like I think it's like changing, and it feels like I'm finally growing up or something. I'm like establishing that New York is my home now, and it's taken a very long time to do that.
What is, in your mind, the main difference between, living in New York City and living in Atlanta?
It's probably just, in my mind, it's the sprawl. It's Atlanta, you have to drive everywhere. But there's a lot more greenery, I guess, and everything's just more spaced out inherently. And New York's obviously super crowded, but not having a car in New York used to annoy me, but now I go out so infrequently that when I do go out, it feels fun, and it's like
Yeah.
sitting on a train and seeing people. And I don't know what's going on, but January was super sleepy. Like New York was really sleepy in a new way, and I'm like waiting for the other shoe to drop. But
I thought we were in the city that doesn't sleep.
Yeah. It's something about this year has felt super zen, and it's like, or I think I'm just more calm now. 'Cause, last year was crazy. When your book comes out and then the whole year is just shot. But this year I don't have to promote a book, so it feels good.
Well, is Atlanta, are there a lot of Korean people in Atlanta? Because I feel like there is this random pocket of thriving Korean American community in Atlanta, because I've heard that from a lot of people, even though I haven't actually seen it myself because I don't get to go.
You should visit when we're both there. It's something I realized later when I was writing my book. I was describing my neighborhood and realizing what a huge Korean American community it was, and it's something I took for granted growing up until I had to really think about Atlanta, and specifically North Atlanta, where I'm from. And then recently, actually, this was really cool. I was on All of It, on the radio, and it was an episode about a new H Mart opening up on the Upper East Side, and they just wanted someone to talk about the culture of H Mart. And she brought up one of the first H Marts was in my hometown. It's like a 5-minute walk from my high school, and it was just so interesting that she like described that, and she like named the date in 2004, and I was like, yep, it was my freshman year of high school, and I remember that. I remember like walking from school to the H Mart, getting snacks with friends, and having all these white people be like, whoa, there's like this new Korean place, and and then they're all trying Korean snacks for the first time. It's just, and then by the end of the high school experience, which is still early 2000s, like 2009 is when I graduated high school. They were like, it's just cool to have all your friends know what pepero is, and like to know what they still don't know what korebap? Korebap? It's so good. But it doesn't have a translation.
Yeah.
So it's like hard you have to tell people to look for the whale on the...
Yeah.
Instead of like an actual English label. Anyway, that was something that I took for granted. And then on the radio, I was talking about that H Mart specifically. And then there was a segment with a bunch of callers. And one of the callers was this caterer who worked, 5 minutes from there, and he was like, when that H Mart opened up, it really helped our catering business because there was all this like fresh produce, and H Mart produce is really different, very like fresh. And I love seeing your hauls when you go to an H Mart and show like it's familiar but different.
Yeah,
it's like the vegetable selection is like really nice. But anyway, this guy named a country club that I recognized, like that was like close to the school, and I was just like, it was cool to like meet another Georgia person on the radio. It was like
yeah, while you're a Manhattanite.
Yeah. And he's like, anyway, it was fascinating. I like revisiting the past to make sense of it and to like put pieces together that you don't think to put together.
Well, I love how you just phrased that, because I think so much of your work is steeped in this kind of pragmatic nostalgia. Like there's a romanticism in nostalgia, but sometimes the danger is that nostalgia becomes sort of useless. You're just kind of like, you're just like steeped in it, and you're like, okay, I'm like just emotional. I'm just a big bag of emotions. And sometimes I worry that my work is like literally just that. My husband always is like, Joanne lives in nostalgia.
I love nostalgia. It feels good. I think it's a little, sometimes I milk it too much. I call them nostalgia tours. Sometimes if I'm like a little tipsy on the train, I'll walk around like a familiar area that I haven't been to in a while and listen to the Taylor Swift song All Too Well, which is she has like a 10-minute version.
That's perfect.
And 10 minutes is the perfect amount of time to like walk around an old college campus and think about past flings and cry. And you're just like, because you're also thinking significantly about where you've arrived, and you're like, wow, this was all part of the plan, but you didn't know it at the time.
Well, you write a lot about kind of your experience growing up. And I would say like not like, as a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, but,
Right.
Kind of later in life, and how that informs the way that you interact with your family, with the community, with your colleagues and all of that. But, at the risk of kind of living in nostalgia or walking too much in nostalgia or being too emotional, like what was sort of like the most memorable moments from your time as a junior high student or as a high school student back in Atlanta?
Yeah, I feel like, I didn't realize how much the book would be a love letter to Buford Highway, and like there are certain interstates in Atlanta that have a lot of Korean businesses and different neighborhoods, and some of my most distinct memories of foods, kind of like aebap, which is really random and specific. But this one place does it with like all of the different rainbow ones, the tobiko, that are, some of them are even like artificially flavored. I think they're just like for the color, and then sesame oil, and that's it. And it's the ae that flavors the rice. And it's just like this really simple side dish that comes in a procession at this one sushi place called Gangnam. I think when I was thinking about those individual moments, I was able to also like kind of plug a restaurant that played a big part in our lives. And just realizing, sometimes you could even go a step further and interview the owner and then learn his story and be like, wow, this is a neighbor whose restaurant I've been eating at for a long time. Every time I walk in, they recognize my dad and like stuff like that. And then but taking that extra step helps you to really appreciate how they got there, because it's probably a really good story.
Speaking of the plan he didn't know, I wanted to ask Eric how he got into food writing, a very particular niche. As you might have guessed, it wasn't as if Eric grew up his whole life dreaming of developing recipes and writing about them for the New York Times. And yet, that's exactly where he ended up. So much of your writing is, of course, about food. And the book that you're referring to, in case listeners, you don't know what we're talking about, it's Korean American. It's an instant New York Times bestselling cookbook by Eric. And the writing that you did for Food 52 before you were laid off, and the work that you do now for the New York Times is at their food desk. But I take it just from the kind of study that you did prior to working at Food 52 or even the Food Network prior to then, it had nothing to do with food, right?
Yeah, no, it was literature at first. I was studying literature, as you can see. There are all these books.
Amazing books, like all my favorite books.
I'm moving soon, so I have to figure out how to, like, what to keep and what not to keep. And
I
always kept them around just because, I think I do refer to my books a lot when I write my columns now. Like, sometimes it's just like a chicken recipe, but I need like something interesting to start the piece with, so I'll dip into like an old text. But so it's interesting how much that comes into play in my work now. But I think one thing that I always do is I work in these obsessive moments. Like every 3 years, I have a new obsession, and writing the Korean American cookbook, that obsession was just, I was intellectually interested in exploring Korean cuisine in America. It's something that I thought was interesting. I had a huge stake in, obviously, and trying to define it was really fun and interesting as well, and challenging. And then, but after that, my obsession was nostalgia. So I think a lot of the pieces I did for the Times in the last couple of years have been kind of like recreating moments in time that a lot of people of a specific generation can relate to. It's like Stouffer's mac and cheese. There was this really strong contingent of children of immigrants who grew up with that as their mac and cheese ideal. And it was cool to find those people and like interview them and try to distill it into a piece. Because it's one thing to have memoir and to talk about yourself, but I think the only way that actually matters is if I connect it to some larger thing. And so I've always felt that way about things like Salisbury steak, and I don't know. I recreated the Loft House cookies from the grocery store, or something that only certain people in the United States know what they are. But I think doing that has helped me to find like the connections among a group of people, and getting to just be like point a finger at something and be like, remember that? Remember that? That was weird. Let's talk about that. and then people are like, oh, you're right. And then it's cool to imagine in one moment everyone being, connected, like through memory. You're like, yeah, I remember where I was when that happened. And yeah.
When did you decide that food was going to be the thing that you would spend so much time on?
I actually went back to some old, really bad poetry that I wrote in college. I had a phase where I thought I was going to
I think a lot of us have had that phase.
We all had that phase. I thought I was going to be a poet. But actually, like in college, the NYU program was really rich with like faculty they just wanted to like, they probably didn't care about teaching that much, but they were, they were nice like contemporary writers that I studied under. And then the poems that I wrote in those classes, I revisited them and realized how much food is in them. And I think that was like actually the first time I was putting words to like food writing. I didn't know it at the time. And then it took dropping out of my PhD program to I started a job at the Food Network right after that, and that's when it started. And then, but I guess like even during grad school, I was posting, like Instagram was for food for a lot of people, and I was writing about food in the captions, and so it was always sort of there, like an underlying kind of thing. And then it took finding clear examples of actual quote unquote food writing for me to be like, oh, this is an actual career. I want to try it. And it's just been like an interesting process of, I feel like I like stumbled into it a little bit, and I think a lot of people still don't know that it's a thing, but it's a great way to get stories across and ideas across.
Eric just casually mentions that he dropped his PhD program to pursue food writing. Needless to say, I found this, along with his somewhat blasé recollection of what, for many people, like me, would be a pretty cataclysmic event, to be nothing short of extraordinary. But as you can probably tell by now, for Eric, it was all just a part of his story. I think you glossed over something that's kind of a big deal to some people, which is you dropped out of your PhD program. Yeah. And there are many people, who feel almost trapped into continuing those types of commitments because they are such an investment financially, from a human perspective, from a time perspective, and all of those things. Can you take us through like the process like that you had to like go through like emotionally, intellectually to be like, I'm going to just stop doing this thing that I've devoted basically my entire academic career to?
Ooh, I like this. I've talked about this before, but never this in depth. You get the exclusive.
Oh yeah, well that's what this is all about.
'Cause frankly, I like probably won't write about it. It's like not that interesting of a time in my life, but sometimes, well, recently actually, the Times just published as like a cover story about a professor I really liked. His name is John Guillory, and he was known in 1993 for writing this book called Cultural Capital, and it was sort of questioning like canon formation. And so I was always interested in like what people and culture deems important in any given time, because it means like what are they deeming not important. And so that it's relatable to us as cookbook authors, as people who aren't white, and in an industry that predominantly has uplifted white writers. I had this moment. Wait, where's I going with this? What was your question again?
The question was take us through the process of like literally saying, "Hey, I've been doing this my whole life, and now I'm going to totally do something different."
Okay, yeah. I think I was always interested in school. I always liked school, and but at the same time, this is the new thing that you made me think about just now. In high school, I was always like decent at English, but I was never the best student really. I lived in a neighborhood in an area where like all of the Asians would change their addresses so they could go to that public school. So it was a public school known for the academics, and so it was very competitive. At the time, I didn't like know that, but I definitely felt it. I think the pressure of like, but at the time, I wanted to be a pop star. Like I didn't care about school.
Oh my God, we got to
much.
talk about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that. That's like a fun part too. But I just like didn't care about doing that well in school. Like it was a time in my life when I was like, it's all about experiences and living, and which is stupid, but because I still cared about like getting into schools and stuff. But I was just never the best student, so I still took the highest classes, and I got decent grades. But I think I always had this complex about not being smart enough, and like even junior year of high school, I did like a theater competition where I sang a song called "I'm Not That Smart," and I always think about that. It's like it is how I felt at the time, because my colleagues were all like straight A's, straight 100 students. Like they would get perfect scores on their tests and stuff, and I was the one who got like 100 sometimes and a 60 sometimes because I just like didn't care. But anyway, I think when I got to college, I found something I liked, which was literary studies. I loved studying with these English professors and reading all these novels from a specific time that weren't really introduced to me during the Fulton County, Georgia curriculum, and it took going to like a New York college to like read some of these other texts, and then I think because I was good at it, and there were people in the program and professors who were like, you should consider doing this more, or you should like, your writing is really strong, you should do this. And I had a lot of cool cheerleaders in college, and they really uplifted me, and so I graduated a year early because I was like, oh, I don't need to, I had like a bunch of APs.
I think that's the same. I graduated a year early
you
too.
did too? Yeah. I mean, because everyone thinks it's because you're like ambitious or something. It's actually because I just did the math early on, and I was like, I don't need to waste another year.
Exactly.
Not waste, but
it is. I mean, it can be a waste when you think about how much money. Yeah, I saved my parents a lot of money.
Yeah. And so I don't know. That was like a thing that I thought, and I also knew what I wanted to do next, and I got into this program, and it was a really prestigious program, and at the time it translated well to my parents, right?
I wanted to get to that, yeah.
Yeah, because
were they your cheerleaders too on this?
Yeah, sure. They were excited that I had found academia, because that means something to like Koreans, and they could explain it to their friends. They're like, oh yeah, Eric's trying to be a paksa, or he's trying to be a professor, or whatever. At insert school name. And then I think it took I think I got to a place where I was like, I don't need to prove my intelligence anymore. I just need to find something that I actually like doing. And getting to academia at such a young age, I was like 20 years old when I entered, and then 23 when I dropped out. And I'm really glad I dropped out earlier, because I think about all those people who stayed, and they were also older, and they had never had a career prior to that. So a lot of these like people in their 30s are being dropped into the regular workforce and starting from scratch and being like editorial assistants and like at like 39 years old. And I don't know, it's like not people are ageist in the industry too, and they don't want to hire they want to hire like the person who's straight out of college who doesn't mind doing the menial labor, but like it's hard to. I remember thinking like I was right at the edge, and I don't know. I think there's always a way out of the academic kind of like chokehold, which is, oh, you dedicated like 6 years of your life, or 8, 9, 10 years, and now you finally get your first job, and it's like this really low paying like, position as an assistant adjunct professor somewhere, and it's just like it's not a great model, and not it doesn't set you up for success. And when I dropped out, it was really hard because that was the only career I thought I knew that I wanted. I always knew that I wanted something that helped me think and sit at a desk and be sedentary and not move that much. I want to have to leave the house and stuff like that. But yeah, luckily I found food writing, which lets you do all of the same things, but there's just more reward because there's literally a recipe at the end and people get to eat. But there's the piece in the Times was about this new book that guy had written, that professor who I had a total crush on. I really liked him in college. He was like so he was so like, I think he's retired now, but he was just like one of those he reminds me of maybe like Professor Lupin in Harry Potter.
Yes!
You know, like kind of like nerdy, but like really like tweed wearing, like, but really like nice.
But tender, yeah.
And tender and smart.
Yeah.
Very fucking smart. And just really cool. And I remember, and the book he wrote, I haven't read it, but the piece was about the book questioning academia, and like it's like, who is it for, is what the article was about. Like, where all these literary critics are, you know, writing things into the void and talking to a bunch of students. Sorry, that's my dog. But the question at the end of the day is, who the hell is this for? And that's what the trouble I had doing that kind of work. I would write about ethnicity and temporality and 20th century fiction, and I'm like, who the fuck is reading this? And no one was reading it. So,
well, I love how you said that the model doesn't set you up for success,
Yeah.
and thus you basically quit.
Yeah.
And you dropped out. And I think that sometimes it's very easy to get trapped into this idea where you feel like, if I quit, or if I drop out, if I walk away from this massive investment that I've made, I'm actually failing.
Yeah.
You know, I failed, and I can't have that word attached to this investment. And so I'm just going to keep ducking my head and doing the work and being miserable, essentially, without acknowledging the fact that, A, the system might have already been rigged so that you couldn't possibly succeed in the way that you want. Or even if that isn't the case, this isn't the thing that brings you joy.
Yes.
I think that when I was your age, I had like a totally different way of thinking. I was terrified of being an adult. I basically chose law school because it was like the most structured path available to me that didn't involve blood. I can't do medicine because I faint at the sight of blood. But so that was why I chose my career. It was purely a fear-induced decision, which is why I find it so fascinating to hear you say that sometime in your early 20s, it sounds like you're like, you know what? I'm okay now. I've proven to myself that I'm as intellectually superior as I need to be. And therefore, now I'm just going to focus on doing something that's fun. How do you think you arrived at that point so early? Because I think there are a lot of young people right now who struggle with that and struggle with, you know, staying true to what brings them actual joy instead of simply soothing their fear.
Yeah, I get a lot of DMs from people who are in academic programs and masters or PhDs, and they're like all depressed. Not all, but I never want to tell anyone one thing, because I think you have to listen to the world a little bit. That sounds so cheesy, but I listened to a podcast of this girl named I think her name was Toya Bowdy. She just put out a book, but I just like the way she talked about life. She was like, you have to listen to the signs, and if you keep ignoring the signs, then you're going to get more signs that you're going the wrong direction. And I think the signs were just pointing to, like, get out, get out, get out.
Like, what signs? What were the signs?
Just, like, watching my superiors graduate and be unemployed, like, despite defending an amazing thesis and writing it and publishing a book that, you know, sells, like, 10 copies. And, like, I think for some people, they don't need I think it's also about what you need as a creative. I realized that I loved writing. Every time I wrote an essay for college, I just like enjoyed the process, and getting the A was like really nice satisfaction. Of course, my dog's eating now, so but
okay.
hopefully we capture some of it. She always chooses to when I'm like recording is when she starts eating her food. It's like really cute. And I'm glad she's eating.
Everything she does is adorable.
She's adorable. The whole time she's also been like going to Joanne's leg and asking for some like attention. So if you've heard little like footsteps, that's her. Anyway, what was I saying? I think. Wait, what was I saying? Sorry, I get really distracted.
Actually, to be honest, I got distracted too. Wait, yeah.
We're doing great.
Oh, you get DMs from people. Oh, the signs that you saw.
You listen to signs. The signs were, when I like got a low pass on my oral exam, which they didn't come up with another word for that, oral exam. But it was me sitting in front of four like of my professors and just defending or talking about the 100 books I'd read, and I didn't know how to talk yet, and I think in that moment when I like struggled so badly to like public speak, and one of the professors even laughed at me. He was such an asshole, and none of the other ones were defending me, so I like looked at all four of them, who were four white men, by the way, and in that moment I was like, oh, I don't belong here, like this is not for me. I wasn't prepared for this. And also, I need to grow up a little bit more. I need to like learn how to talk. So, I think there were signs like that, and then I went to get coffee with an old professor. She was this really hot shot, like Yale graduated. She was so good at what she was doing, but even she didn't get a job after, or a job that she deemed maybe like prestigious enough or something. Like she ended up dropping out of academia and teaching public school, and found like way more happiness and peace doing that.
Eric's look back at his path makes it seem like he almost had no choice but to pull out of academia. But that would, of course, undercut the courage it took to step off the road he'd been on for so long, and also the one his parents were probably really excited that he was on. So many people view quitting as synonymous with failure. But then Eric says something that catches me totally by surprise.
I think one thing that I really took as a sign was just failing. I think failing is what always helps me get to the next thing. And I just think about like if I hadn't failed and experienced those moments where life was telling me like try something else now, I wouldn't have arrived here. But what's really lovely is this job that I'm doing now feels like a great culmination of all those experiences. Like I really use things I learned in grad school, and usually I always joke that the degrees don't help me with anything, and they really don't. Like you don't need, like doing what I do anyway, like you don't need a degree to do any of it. But the time I spent researching and learning how to write, like synthesize different texts, like that's basically what a report is. That's like a reported story, or like, so it's interesting. And now the joke I make is that I'm just always writing essays, and they're always due, and I have 2 due on Monday, and I'm probably gonna need an extension on one of them, but the only difference is you don't get graded. But it's like you're grading yourself.
Yeah.
You have a high standard or something like that. But I don't know. I think I'm glad I landed in writing. That's like something I was supposed to do.
There's this great author, and I've talked about him to death. I talk about him all the time. His name is David Epstein, and he wrote this wonderful book. You may have read it. It's called Range. It's a brilliant work in that he sort of takes on this notion that you have to devote 10,000 hours in order to be an expert at anything. And he's like, well, why not be a truly unique expert in that you give yourself permission to fail, which then liberates you to try a lot of different things and collect all of those disparate experiences and kind of patch them together so that at the end of the day, however you leverage all of that patchwork is really unique. There's literally only one supply of that patchwork, and that's you, right? And if you can somehow create a demand for that, create a category of demand for that unique patchwork, And I think that's what I'm hearing from what you're saying is there was some part of you that wanted to have impact. And perhaps, as a PhD, however prestigious and, however proud your parents would be, it would not have reached into as many hearts as you obviously now do.
Yeah, I realize that I care about that now. Like, I can't just write something and then keep it in my diary or something. I need to literally just output it. I don't even need feedback on it, but I need to put it out into the world. And it's like this annoying arty thing that I'm sure like painters relate to, or I don't know. It's like, it's not enough to just do it. I want people to ingest it, you know? I want them to like, what's really great is, not to, it's a dumb pun, but like, it's nice that people will cook your recipe that same day and then send you a picture back, and then you get to have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
It's like fun.
Well, community.
It's community. It's really fascinating. And then those same people show up to your book talks, and then they tell you their life stories, and sometimes they cry.
Yeah.
It's really intense. And so I like knowing that I have a place now where I get to be creative and put out work. And so what's great now is really getting to try to get to that 10,000. Like, do it as much as possible, get better every year, try new things every other month, and I think it's like the perfect job for me, and it's not that different from being a professor. I think it's like fun.
You just have very different students.
Different students.
Yeah. Where do you think how do you think you developed your love of literature?
It was just always school. I think like my English teachers were great. This is also my Joanne and I joke about how I always say everything's an essay, but I do like think in essays, and I want to write about this, but everyone has like that English teacher who like inspired them to do whatever, and I had like a bunch of them, and I think of them in my head, and sometimes recently actually I had a drink with an old high school teacher, and it was just so fun to hear the gossip, and she's still there, but like doing amazing work, and she was also so young when she was teaching us, and now she's, come into her own as an educator, and it's like cool to hear her talk about. Also, she like teaches some of my essays, to her kids.
Oh, wow.
So that's, I don't know, it's a nice like full circle moment, but those people are really special, and the people who decide to be an English teacher and who are trying to inspire kids, and because like the cheesy trope is the English teacher who calls you in after class, and it's like, are you doing okay? Or they're like the ones who really see you, and they believe in you, and they're a little cheesy, and
did you have that growing up a lot?
yeah, I had a bunch of those. So I don't know, I think about those are the people who really inspired me the most. Like, no offense to the math teachers, but you weren't like going into their classes after to talk about life and stuff.
Yeah. Can you remember the first piece of literature, like, one that would be classically defined as part of canon, that you like completely fell in love with, and how it came into your hands?
Well, good question. I mean, I feel like I have to go way back. This is so random, but I remember The Hound of the Baskervilles. I don't know why, but my middle school curriculum was a lot of like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and so I fell in love with mystery, writing. And awesome. Mystery writing is cool because it has a history in serial literature, which is like kind of like the literature version of TV.
Yeah.
Every week in the newspaper, a new story would be published, and they're all connected, and so you have to like keep up, and that's like fun. And so I like thinking of like publications in that way. Like I'm writing a column now for the New York Times Magazine, and I was, usually I'm just like running from one deadline to the next, but this year I was like, I'm going to create a narrative. There's like a through line, and so this year I'm focusing on, it's a monthly column, so every month I'm going to present a new expert and a new obsession of that month, and like I have a biscuit coming out soon. I was making so many biscuits that month, and then just like, it's nice when you can learn things as an adult. Like, that's the great thing about cooking. There's always so much to learn, so I definitely view it as culinary school, and I just happen to be writing about it very publicly.
Not only was I excited to find another Korean-American food writer, I was immediately drawn to his vulnerability, to his willingness to bare himself, even though he wasn't always sure how he'd be received. And thus I asked him a question I've often had to think about myself. Well, I think one of the cool things about your writing is that there is a clearly defined voice that is very lovable, very endearing. I think you had a column even at Food 52, right? It was the Table for One, is that right? Yeah. And I think a lot of people sort of fell in love with that. And we get to know a lot about you through those, little bits and pieces that you decide to share. Have you ever been nervous about
Yeah.
sharing too much or being a little bit too vulnerable?
Yeah, for sure. That column was a lot of practice, to be honest. Like, I don't know. It actually did get pretty popular. A lot of people read it, but at the time I was aware that it wasn't like that many people, like relatively speaking. But it was also me just like trying things out and trying out memo writing for the first time with food. And I think there were weeks where I would like kind of be nervous and be like, maybe I shouldn't have written about my boyfriend like that, or maybe I shouldn't have revealed all of that. And then, but it was just like practicing oversharing and sharing just enough. And because like there's a moment when you realize that the personal information needs to be serving the story, and otherwise it's just like word vomit, and you're just trying to like get something off your chest, and that's never the best piece. So I like to now I protect myself from that. I try to write about things like way after it's happened. I keep them like present trauma. I like try to keep it locked in a box until I'm ready to write about it. And but I think that that column helped me to sort of find my voice and figure out when I'm like how much to reveal. And I got to a place where I'm comfortable with what I reveal now. I don't reveal any more than I want to. But so if you want like ratchet Eric, you go to those old columns because I really get into it, and I had no filter because I was doing it for the first time.
But I think
But
that
people like that. Yeah.
like there is this whether it's practice from just years of study or reading a lot of literature, there is a detachment even in those earlier essays that I very much appreciated because it gave space for me to respond
Yeah.
to what you were describing. And I think that's exactly what you described, which is, you keep your present trauma locked up in a box until you're ready, but you can describe and talk about things that have happened and you're kind of comfortable with now. And I think part of that is, again, trying to create a gap in which the reader can sort of reside while they're reading through your words. The other thing that you said earlier is, this idea of art and having to you want people to ingest like what you're putting out there. It's not enough for you to just write in your diary or something like that. And I was talking about this with my therapist like about a month ago, where I was like, I'm so ashamed of my need to have my work, consumed. And she was like, why? She's like, it doesn't always have to be altruistic. It doesn't all have to be about making an impact in other people's lives. Why aren't you allowed to be seen too? Like, you're allowed to be seen. Like, and there is sort of a healing component to, putting your work out there, even if it's being consumed by a bunch of strangers, right? Have you ever, like, gone back and read some of the earlier work and been like super cringe and like, oh my God, why did I write that? Or why did I share that?
For sure. Yeah, I do. But if there are some pieces where I go back and I'm like, wow, I forgot how unbridled I used to be. Like very like nonfiction-y. I was just like I didn't even know about food writing that much, so I was writing in a very different way. And there's a point when you're in an industry and you're like it's like an echo chamber, and you start to like replicate what other people are doing, and that's when you have to like step back and try to I don't know, have your own voice. But it's really complicated because I sometimes I just have to get it done, and I think that was the practice that I really appreciated. I heard Kenji Lopez on this podcast called Everything Cookbooks. It's a great podcast for anyone who wants to write a cookbook. But he goes on there and talks about his time at Serious Eats and how the blog kind of generation that he was writing and I was writing, frankly, was like it was good practice because otherwise you don't have that experience of just having to like churn out stuff. And so having a weekly column was me just being like, okay, I have 2 hours to write this. How do I feel this week? And it was very like Carrie, Sex and the City vibes, and sometimes in good ways, but sometimes not. Actually, one time I did do a cosmopolitan recipe because I was like interested in that drink, and I went to a bar a lot that made really great cosmopolitans. And yeah, sometimes I read these old pieces too, and I remember who I was when I was writing them, and that's part of the joy too. You have it like locked into words, like you have like a genealogy of who you used to be, and it's nice when I think some people are like the cringe makes you feel bad sometimes, but for me, it's more, it makes me feel good that I've grown so much.
Oh, that's a great way of putting
Yeah,
it.
if I like read something that sounds like ridiculous, or I'm like, oh, this person in this story sounds maybe like he should stop drinking a little bit. He like keeps stumbling into his apartment drunk for some reason. So that was like one of my leads that I always wrote, because I drank a lot in those years. I had like a problem, and then so I remember just like being like, I'm so happy with who I am now. I'm like, I'm really different.
And that you also have the wherewithal to recognize that.
Those patterns,
Yeah. One of the characters, I'll call it, that comes up pretty frequently in your writing is, of course, your mother, Jean.
Yeah,
We all
sure.
know her as Jean.
Yeah.
Tell us about your relationship with your mom.
It's evolving a lot. It's changing all the time. Just last night, she randomly kakaoed me, and she was like, Kakao is the Korean messaging system
Thank you.
that most Koreans use with their families. But she was like, can you order those chicken wings for me? And she, like, when I go home, I always order from this place called Sumo, and they have the best like lemon pepper wings, and they have this nice little combo with fried rice. And so from my phone, I just like ordered like takeout to her house
From Atlanta,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
basically.
she was like, just as my birthday gift. I was like, oh, it's not a birthday gift. And I was like, yeah, and I was like, why not? Like, that's cute that she decided that night. She was like, I'm not cooking today, and like, so I don't know. Just to answer the question.
No, but that's like a perfect
Kind
depiction.
of like really, yeah. It's like interesting to see how far we've come technologically, but also, yeah, my mom and I got to know each other really well during the writing of the book.
So often, we take our parents for granted. We think we really know them because for many of us, of all the people in our lives, they've literally been there since day one. But Eric touches upon something I've often thought about myself. Seeing my mother and father as not just my parents.
So I think it's been interesting to establish a relationship between us that's like, it's no longer like kid and mom. That's still there, but it's also like we like know each other better, and it's an interesting, it's always growing. My relationship with my dad is growing right now a lot too, and so that's the new obsession that I'm excited to write about for the next book. Yeah, I don't know. The problem I have with writing about my mom is I feel like I had to get that out of my system, because it's like, you know, you're talking about the beginning of your life, and I'm writing about Korean food. I have to write about her, but now I feel like I like try to stop myself if I'm gonna mention her, because it to a point there's a point where it can get like cliched. It's like my mom, like people who use their parents as like authenticity kind of goalposts or something, and especially when you're writing about a cultural cuisine. But now I just try to keep it to the details, and if my mom is truly in the story, I'll put her in. But like I'm hesitant because I'm a little self-conscious about that. It's like, you know, there haven't been many of these comments, but one hate comment is like, oh, this guy built his career on the back of his mother's labor or something. I'm just, like, they don't like know the details of our relationship. But I do think, like, especially coming up as a younger person, you want to like establish that you're an authority in your own right, and I think it's like a careful balance. Yeah. Also, I'm like, no offense to my mom, but I'm like bored of writing about her now. You know what I mean? Like, you know, unless it's like not a food essay, that's different. But I've like done a lot of that. Ready to move on.
I mean, but one of the lovely things that you do is that you do call her Jean.
Right.
And I think that's pretty amazing. I always call my mom Amma, even in my book. But I did this podcast episode a few months ago where I was like, I want to introduce you to Sunny. And it was because it's just this notion that it's hard to get out of this habit of viewing our parents as just our parents, as mom and dad, and that's really all they are. Who, you know, they're these anchors in our lives, and sometimes I worry that my parents feel a little bit invisible because I don't ever bother to ask them about like what was life like before I was born, because I'm the center of your world, obviously. You know, and so I love that you call her Jean. I don't know if that's why you decided to call her that.
I like that you have that concern, because sometimes I think Korean parents are used to being like invisible.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when their kids are doing media, and, you know, like especially for the book shoot, it was just cute to watch them get dressed, and I'm like, no, this is about you guys. Like, this is, you know, there are no pictures of me in the book. It's like supposed to be about the family. So it was nice to like give them that, but on the other hand, my mom actually just like doesn't like attention. So she only agreed to one press event, which was like the talk in Atlanta, and Kim Severson interviewed me and my mom on stage, and she was really good at it actually, which is it's just funny but she said no to every other opportunity, and she was like, I don't want to get famous. Like, I'm like at the end of my life, like not the end, but she's like, I'm an adult and I want to like live my quiet life. So, that's another reason why I don't write about her anymore. It's like I think she wants some like quiet now and peace, but I think writing about parents, that was always my original anxiety from the start. The reason I call her Jean is because I think there's like a situation where when children of immigrants write about their parents, it's always like kind of caricatured. There's a whole genre of TikTok about it. It's like, oh, my mom cuts fruit for me, and like she shows her love through food. She doesn't know how to say I love you, so she blah 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 blah, or like a lot of children of immigrants have those kinds of relationship with their parents, but I think I wanted to show how she was really a character, because she's like she's like a really specific personality, and she's really strong, and she in many ways she is like that adorable immigrant mom trope, but she's also not in a lot of ways. And I think in order to like create a profile of a family that is distinct, and this was a very political thing for me too, because going into the book I was aware that there were a lot of Koreans who felt that Korean food should be represented in one specific way, and those people are really boring, and they're like really, that I don't take them seriously. But I wanted to make that part of the framing, like this is just one story and you need to go out and see the other ones. That's why I loved that our books were like in succession. Like it was cool to see Korean Vegan next to Korean American, next to Korean H Mart, next to like sometimes Min's books like there.
You know, all like bask under the glow of pachinko.
Pachinko. But they're all like pulled together in Korea, actually, like in Korean bookstores. Like our books are like together because they're like, oh, these are all the Korean Americans who wrote English books. I don't know. Where am I going with this? Just I think I'm like aware of the trope, and I'm always trying to like not fall into it, but I don't know. I can't help it. Like I am a mama's boy, and like my mom is like an adorable like Korean lady. Like she's like a great Korean mom, and she's So I don't know. It's like striking that balance.
I think families are complicated. All families are complicated, however perfect they look on the outside. And I often get from, my own community, oh, your mom and dad are perfect. They're just the most adorable. They actually get more recognized than I do. Like when we go out,
really?
People are like, I only knew it was you because I saw your mom and dad. So they, a lot of people think that there's like this image of them, but I've, kind of gone out of my way to say, hey, look, they're human beings, and I don't want you to have your bubble bursted in any other way. So I'll just be very, candid about it. They haven't always done the right thing. They make mistakes. There have been times where they probably regretted having children because they didn't know what the F they were doing, and I think that's really important to acknowledge. Undoubtedly, the most memorable food essay I've ever read, not just of Eric's, but of anyone's, was the piece he wrote about coming out as gay to his parents. He writes, I cursed the gods for making the words for coming out in Korean so much longer, so much more assonant than in English. After I said it, as casually as I could over salmon skin rolls and hot sake, and the longest breath I'd ever held, they laughed. I'll never forget that laugh, when for one brief moment I thought I was being presumptuous, assuming they didn't already know. But after they saw that I was serious, their smiles quickly faded. My mom sighed. She looked so tired, the most tired I'd ever seen her. My dad paused, then bawled into his hands in the middle of the crowded restaurant. One of my favorite essays by you, of course, is, I came out to my parents over kimchi fried rice. And of course, it made me cry. I think it made everybody cry. And I think one of the reasons that was such a powerful essay was because you were very unflinching when it came to revealing their weaknesses on this topic. And the other thing that I think you did so generously for your readers was, again, writing in a way that was detached enough where I could sit in that space and just be there. And I remember when you wrote, my father said, I felt like my son died. And there's literally a space, a hard return, and then one line, what do you say to that? And then another line. And that line kind of exists on that space by itself. And the amount of restraint it must have taken to write that sentence and that be the only sentence to that. I mean, obviously your parents have come a long way since then, but do you, again, find it hard to write about those kinds of things, especially now in such a public way?
I do now. Like, when I wrote that was my first food essay that I had ever really written, and first of that mode, and I think it was, I actually didn't even get their permission. I just, wrote it. But I did know that there's a careful dance. Like, I didn't want to throw them under the bus. Like, I wanted them to look good in the story. But I'm getting to a point now where I'm writing, really, more intense essays about my life, and I'm like, what can you reveal and what can you not when it's not just your own business? It's like, my mom and dad want privacy now, and there's certain things that they probably don't want me to say in a piece. But that essay was, I think it's interesting you said restraint, because I feel like I didn't have any then, and maybe it reads a certain way, but I feel like I have much more anxiety now. So now when I write about my own life, I find it very difficult. It's like, because I just don't do it that often anymore. Or if I do it, it's for a column that has a nut graph, which is like the paragraph that tells you what the piece is going to be about, and there's a recipe at the end. So it's like a formula, but writing without a formula, because you don't know what the genre is yet, that kind of writing, I'm trying to actually tap back into that kind of space, because there was a lot of creativity in those moments. But I feel like I know a lot more now, and it prevents me from writing. I don't know. Sometimes. It depends.
Well, I think food memoirs are now becoming much more of a thing. But I think back when you wrote that essay, it was still sort of like a non-category of writing, right? There's food writing as in, I researched this particular ingredient, I went to Sardinia, I met with the nonna, and she taught me how to do this, and da-da-da-da-da, and this is why I use anchovies or whatever,
Right.
that's food writing. The notion of tying something as, cataclysmic as coming out to your Korean parents in Atlanta with kimchi 볶음밥.
Yeah.
That's kind of unheard of. What do you think is that sort of visceral connection that we have between these powerful moments in our lives, like identity changing moments, and food?
I know what question you're asking, and I want to answer it, but it's funny because my brain is automatically going to a very scientific.
I want to hear the science.
Craft of writing. But to answer the question first, it's I think I'm really interested in the ordinary, so I'm really interested in the ordinary. I hate the way it sounds when I talk sometimes. But the ordinary, when you write about something really boring, and then you put it down on paper, and then you step away and you're like, oh, that's actually really poignant, or that's an interesting moment in life, and what's great is when you write about the ordinary, then other people really relate to it. So they're like, oh yeah, my brother's gay, or I came out to my parents too, and yeah, I have Asian parents, and it's really hard to come out to them. Or the comment section of that piece is what really drives the point home. I think it's not even just the piece, it's the comment section has a bunch of people who are telling their stories, and that's what I love. I think that's the benefit of writing this genre. You get a lot of people who really relate to things viscerally, and then they come to you and tell you how it related to them, and it's some people break down, and you have to hug them and comfort them, and it's really beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I'm sure you really relate to that too.
I do. I think
That girl literally cried at your talk, and then you gave her a speech in front of everyone. I was like, yes. I was like, you just got Korean vegan. She loved it. It was so sweet. I like something like that.
Well, I
That's
felt so
cool.
bad for her. Okay, so just to explain, Eric is referring to a moment during one of my biggest book tour events out in Brooklyn. There were hundreds of people who came to meet me and listen to me talk about the book. And towards the end, during the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand and started to ask a question. I'm in medical school right now, but I don't want to be a doctor. And and she couldn't finish because she started to cry. I offered her the same advice as I've offered many people in those shoes. Think more about what brings you joy and less about what soothes your fear. But here's the best part of the story. My mom, who was in the crowd that night, went up to the young woman later that evening. She put her hands on her shoulder and started comforting her by saying, "You're going to be a wonderful doctor." Bad for her.
I got a really adorable email the other day from a man who, I wrote a piece that it wasn't very personal at all, but at the very end I talk about my boyfriend and, us having the chicken at this table, actually. And Sam Sifton, in his newsletter, he wrote he wrote the words like Eric's boyfriend, and that 65-year-old man, that meant a lot to him, because he was like, he grew up in a different time, and he was like, and he was gay, and he wrote me this lovely email that I've told like 2 or 3 people now about this email and haven't responded, and I need to go respond to him.
I know exactly what you mean.
When you get an email that's too important, and you're just like, oh, how do I respond to this?
Well, you want to give it the proper attention and like not be kind of pulled apart in every single direction. Yeah, I totally know what you mean.
So I think we're in maybe people have always been like this, and this is the draw of columns like Modern Love and I don't know. Do you remember the chicken soup?
Yeah, yeah. I had like 7 of those books. Yeah.
It's like those really simply written nonfiction, prose pieces that help people feel very seen, and people like that. And I've also seen the opposite. When they don't feel seen, they get angry. So, well, that's annoying too.
You alluded to that earlier. You said it, a political piece, and a lot of times I think people kind of blanch at the idea of food being political, and I think when I hear the phrase, that food is political, which I hear a lot, I actually think a lot about another one of my favorite pieces that you wrote, which is Kimchi is a Verb. I tell people about that article all the time. And I remember that it was a, pretty, I would say like unemotional study of kimchi, but I found myself actually crying like towards the end of it. And I think part of it was being like, there is somebody writing about kimchi in the freaking New York Times. The representation of it, and to and really see what I like when I say like kimchi-fy something, and I was like, oh, somebody else understands what I mean by that. It's not really a food. It's really just a methodology, and it's one that's steeped in, tradition, but also like this fundamental need to survive, right? Like you just want to make the cabbage last as long as you possibly can, right? And what does that mean about who we are as Koreans, as humans, as all of these things? So when you say, and you've said this to me a couple of times, food is political, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I think one thing when you're writing about food is there's always a power dynamic, and that's what I mean by the politics of it. It's like, I'll just tell the story of the kimchi pieces at the Times. Like, that was my very first piece at the Times. I was so proud of it. It went up, and I went to the park to celebrate with my friends. And I came back to an email that was like, from the editor. She was like, well, we got this email, and it was from one of my haters. And this person who's like never liked me, and it's a Korean American who is also a journalist, and this person was like, this like emailed the editor directly and was like, this has so many errors in it, this piece is appalling, blah 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 blah. It's so they got it so wrong, and I was really terrified. I was like, whoa, I had no idea there would be like a backlash. And
this is your first time,
Times. So luckily the editors like stood by me, and they were like, let's just read the piece and make sure there are no actual errors. And I was like, no, there are no errors, but it's like a political thing. It's like this Korean person thinks that when kimchi is in the New York Times, it has to be a certain way. And the piece is talking about it's just like I was doing like a thing. I was like trying to introduce this idea and then offer like some really fun recipes at the end. And they were muchims. They were muchim recipes, which are like more of like dressed salads, but have a lot of this the flavors of kimchi. And that's something my mom did at the time. Like, or growing up, she would always when we didn't have any kimchi, she would make a muchim and make like sometimes a kachori.
Yeah, kachori.
Sometimes just like a kimchi like thing on the table. And I was trying to give that idea because I'm always surprised. I'm always like, did you really need like a kimchi 101 piece from me? And then after we published that first piece about muchims, kimchi as a verb, the editor and I were like, maybe we needed a kimchi 101 actually, and then it made us think about like coverage in the past, and they've written about kimchi plenty. You know, Mark Bittman, Julia Moskin, like everyone's done that. But so when I finally a year later I did the big kimchi piece, and I was really happy with it, proud of it. But you know, no one like read it. It was just one of those things where it's like all these Koreans like are yelling at you for not doing an authentic thing, and then you finally do the big authentic thing, and they don't show up. And it's like I don't know. I'm like reading too much into the behavior of like traffic and stuff, but that piece. So the first piece, the kimchi piece, I got like hate mail from Korean Americans who were like upset that they weren't the Korean person who wrote that piece. There's like this realization that there's a scarcity mindset, and I think that's why really they were like attacking me, and that's something I think about a lot, and I'm aware of that I'm in a very like privileged position. But then when I did write the real kimchi piece, and I wrote about fermentation, and like I really did a whole video and everything, brought in all of these voices, these experts, and talked about the situation of kimchi in the moment. There were like racist comments from white people, and I was just like, man, you can't win. It's like, and then I think I realized that's actually when I started going into this deep depression, because I was like reading the comment sections too much, and there were a lot of authenticity gatekeepers from the Korean side, but then from the non-Korean side there were a lot of like racists, and so I'm just like, you know, making dog jokes or like talking about how the kimchi looks like blood and like bullshit like that, and it just, I don't know, that made me very cynical about humanity. I was, I feel like the reason I'm able to write about people and draw out the good things is because I've seen so many bad things doing this line of work. And I don't know, it's just, I think we all see bad things on the internet, but I think that's made me more reserved, and I don't like post as much anymore.
Well, I think there's more than just cynicism, though, because I think cynicism is sort of like an intellectual evaluation or observation, right, about the state of things. I mean, doesn't it actually like hurt your feelings sometimes, like
Yeah,
personally,
sure.
to
Yeah.
like, especially that first one where you're like putting yourself out there in like this most vulnerable way, talking about a cuisine and you know, an aspect of that cuisine that historically has been made fun of, right? And for the New York freaking Times, and to put yourself out there and then immediately receive feedback from your boss that there might be an error. I mean, wasn't that sort of terrifying?
It was horrifying, and I didn't understand what was happening. So that's when I called one of my colleagues. She would become a colleague. She actually wasn't on staff yet, but Priya Krishna. I always tell this story because like I think she wouldn't mind. But I called her and she said, "Welcome to the club," and because she had received that backlash from the Indian community, and then Samin Nosrat tweeted the same thing right after that. She gets hate from the Persian community, and then Nick Sharma gets it also from the Indian community. And there were all these people who spoke out and were like, yeah, it's your community that comes for you first. And it's one of those things that I've come to psychologize, and I understand. And I always have to remind myself that for every negative Nancy, which there aren't that many to be honest, there's always someone who's reading it across the ocean, or not across the ocean, but across the country, who's like crying because they're so moved by it. So you're just like, ugh, you need to focus on the good ones. But yeah, I wrote about Tok Mandukuk recently, and that's what I like. I felt like it felt like a graduation or something from my year of writing about Korean food. Right, that's the year Korean American came out, and I'm gonna write about Korean food again, but it felt like a nice like capstone. I was like, I wrote about this dish that I grew up hating, and Koreans hated reading about a Korean hating a Korean dish, and I was like, and I started to understand why. I was like, I get it, but because there were some fans who were giving me giving me constructive criticism, and I listened to those comments, and I was like, and I really thought deep down, I was like, oh, did I mess up? But you know, I do stand by the work, but I recognize the politics of it. It's like, you know, these people who don't see themselves on the page, and then you see like a negative kind of rendition or something, or you see someone who's like saying something negative, but I don't know, that was just my truth. Like, I grew up not liking tteokbokki, and then so I made a version that I do like, and that was like my journey of coming to really love the dish, but it didn't come through because people only read what they want to read and see what they want to see, and yeah, but then that same thing happened, which was, you know, there were like a few naysayers, but then this one person who listened to the story, and because there's always like audio on it, they cried because they felt seen, and they're like fourth generation Hawaiian, and I don't know. The gatekeeping is something that makes me very cynical about writing about non-white cuisines because people are just so. I think they're so scarred. They're so traumatized by their upbringing.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. It's hard to remember that though sometimes when you're, the subject of attack and you're like, I have to remember that these people are dealing with their own issues, projecting their issues on us because they don't know.
And they're usually part of a different generation, to be honest.
That's very true too. I think what's so ironic is that I'm on the one hand the Korean vegan and you're on the other hand doing Korean food and we both have haters who are like, you're not authentic.
Well, the thing you get is that Korean food can't be vegan. Is that
basically.
What you get?
Yeah,
It's
a lot
stupid,
of there are a lot of
so
Korean Americans and Asian Americans who think that my food is completely, it's a sellout to the white man or something.
Yeah, which is stupid because they don't understand the Buddhist history.
Oh yeah, I've said, and the biggest irony, of course, is when it does hurt when it's coming from your own community. It's sort of laughable when it comes from some white person who went to a Korean restaurant one time.
Yeah, that happens a lot too. My wife is Korean, and I'm like, oh,
exactly. My wife is Korean, and therefore I know you're not.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And what I love about your experience in describing, hey, I don't really like takmanduguk. I know a lot of people do, but I never really liked it. Here's a version that I recreated or reimagined because it's more palatable to me, is this idea of not just adequate representation, but honest representation. And I think about this a lot, especially now. I've been told so many times by, PR people, journalists, and even my own, team, Korea's having its moment.
Oh, yeah.
K-pop is having its moment.
Right.
And like, are you riding the wave? Right. And I'm like, I guess so. And I think that's wonderful. I remember the first time I saw BTS, like on a commercial, I was like, oh my God, like this is really strange. And like,
but ultimately, like, I'm always proud.
I'm so proud.
And like, Koreans aren't. They're like, oh man, gochujang cookies in the New York Times.
See, this is
like,
exactly what I'm talking about. Is that
gatekeeper culture more?
Well, it's not even just gatekeeping. It's like it's flattening. We're so much more.
They want you to be like the cuisine that came in from the 80s.
Exactly.
It's like they don't recognize that even their version of it is so small.
It's already flattened. It's two-dimensional, and so
it's not updated.
You've rendered a three-dimensional version of this dish because it's honest, it's you, it's what you enjoy. And I think that when I hear a lot about, K-pop stan, K-stan, and, now especially when so many people are like obsessed with K-dramas and like Korean movies and like everyone's trying to learn Korean and eat gochujang and everything. Yeah. Like, there's a part of me that's, like, so excited by that. It's very similar to the feeling I had when I read your article, Kimchi is a Verb. I was like, oh, my God, this is in the New York Times. But then I start to worry, like, okay, adequate representation, great. Is it really truthful? Or are we just reinforcing existing stereotypes and making everything flat again? And so I say all of these things because I think it's a great segue into why you wanted to be a K-pop star.
I've thought a lot about it. If Eric Nam is listening, he and I were like childhood friends, like our parents are friends, and so I remember the time that he went on a show called K-pop Star, I think, and that show kept emailing me. Like they really, every time they were in New York, they wanted me to audition, and I just like didn't want to be a K-pop star because like at the time I thought I was so much cooler, and I was way more into like Michelle Branch and like John Mayer and Vanessa Carlton, like that type of teen singer-songwriter thing in the early aughts. That was like a really big thing. Taylor Swift like was the big one that came at the end of that kind of generation, I would say. But I was writing songs and playing guitar and writing in English mostly. I also didn't know Korean that well. I couldn't imagine like having to learn it which would have been great for me. But I mostly wanted a record deal in America, so I was choosing between schools.
You have like very specific dream.
I know. Well, I thought about this lately actually. Every dream I've had, every like goal I've had to do with like outputting kind of like assets. that sounds weird, but like when you're like a recording artist, it's like singles and songs, and when you're a professor, it's like books and lectures, and then when you're a recipe developer, it's recipes. And so it's just interesting. Like when I put out a recipe now, I really the what is it called, the rollout the rollout of a new recipe is I very much like gained a lot. I like do it the way I've seen Michelle Branch promote her songs a long time ago, and it's really interesting in that way. And they do feel like singles. Like they're like they come out once a month, and people cook them in that season. And then anyway, it's really fascinating. But after high school, I was deciding between Nashville and New York colleges, and I really, because I was actually into songwriting and country music at the time, but I knew the possibility of like an Asian, like 18-year-old like Asian pop singer being like, getting on country radio versus like getting on, pop radio was like, it was like a little more likely to do the pop. So I chose New York, and my brother was also here. So I just remember always, like, I played a lot of the gigs, a lot of the rock clubs in, around Washington Square Park. I went to NYU for college, and so I played at the Bitter End a lot, Pianos, Arlene's Grocery. There were these like really old school kind of places where people like Lady Gaga and Vanessa Carlton got started. Bob Dylan, James Taylor. It's like many generations, and so feeling the weight of those venues was really fun because they're very like small. They're just like rock clubs, and NYU students probably play them all the time. Like especially now, I'm sure there are so many like TikTok like singer songwriters. But at the time, it was really old school. Like I recorded an EP. And I remember getting like fan mail and like the $3 or $4 that like in cash, like because it was like through PayPal, like, one of those HTML PayPal forms on my website, and that's how you would order a CD, like a literal CD, and sometimes it would arrive cracked, and they would be like, can I return this? And anyway, it was just like.
You got really far.
It was a different time. Yeah. That was like a big part of my life, and I would do these shows, and the whole dorm floor would show up, and I don't know. So I was always used to like being on stage and talking to people, and now what's really funny is on book tour you always have a microphone, right? And sometimes it's like a loose microphone, and some of the photos I'm like closing my eyes or like I'm blinking.
You're like
it looks like I'm singing. It's hilarious. And anyway, I think I like thinking about how like they're not that different. Like when you have to go on a morning show during book tour season, and it's like you wake up at like 4 a.m. a car takes you to some weird place, and then you do your thing for like 10 minutes, and then you just get off stage. And I don't know. I think about the similarities, and I actually did run into one of the Jonas brothers. Was it Kevin? Kevin Jonas was at GMA one time, and it was just like interesting. I was like, we all do the same thing. Like if whether you're the music guest, whether you're the chef guest, whether you're the actor guest or whatever, you only have like 5 to 7 minutes to like do your thing, and then you just like go home.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think like morning talk shows are really fascinating, and K-pop is like that. These girls, like during the single releases, they're like scheduled for like 3 or 4 performances in a week, and then they have to get there early, and then they do it, and then they just like take the rest of the
in
day
and out.
off. In and out.
Yeah.
And it's very I had a moment where I was thinking about that a lot, because it's like the life of like a K-pop star is like much harder. I know, but like sometimes I feel like a K-pop star.
Well, it sounds like you have the perfect like happy balance. I mean, you're rolling out your recipes, and doing that and creating immense impact with your writing, but you're also getting to write a lot.
Yeah, write and practice the craft, and so I think that's the greatest joy. Like arriving at a place where now I can just focus on the work and focus on putting out good things and focus on getting better too. That's like a real pleasure, and I don't know. It feels like school. It's like, and I've always really liked school.
Oh, that's good. So what's next for Eric Kim, writer for the New York Times?
Next is I'm trying to finish an essay, because I want to write a collection of essays next, and my agent is like waiting for copy, and it's really hard to write, outside of work when you do it for your job.
Yeah.
So it's sort of something I'm just trying to work on, and it's also hard because I'm trying to write about. They're not really food essays anymore, so they're different, and they're new, so they're hard to write.
Yeah.
It's very hard.
Well, I'm really excited about it. For those of you who don't already follow Eric, where can they find you?
Eric Chunho, JOONHO, and that's me everywhere, Twitter, Instagram. I'm actually on TikTok now too, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't really use it that much.
And he's also the star of the New York Times Cooking Channel on YouTube, like the indisputable star, in my view.
Oh, I'm on there sometimes, along with my colleagues who are all great, and it's really fun. It sort of feels like the Disney, like the Mickey Mouse Club.
Yeah.
A little bit. Like, I don't want it to be that,
But like in a very
in a healthy
adult,
way.
professional way.
Adult,
Yeah.
professional, healthy
Yeah.
way. Everyone's just there to do a good job, and everyone's like, I love my job, and the people who, that's the real thing. Like, when you just find people who are really good at what they do, and it's like, those are the people I want to keep close, because they're, just people who have also worked hard to get where they are, and that's like,
Yeah. Well, Eric's book is chock full of beautiful recipes, many of which are either vegan or eminently veganizable, trust me. And Eric and I are always talking about vegan things. Many of his recipes, if they are not already vegan, many of them are veganizable, and he's always been available to me, at least, to be like, can you help me veganize this?
I think that's fascinating. I enjoy that kind of cooking.
I love that. I think
Figuring it out.
I think that people who are truly good at their craft when it comes to food and cooking will not be taken aback or get defensive when somebody like me says, hey, is there a plant-based way to do this? They're actually usually curious, intrigued, challenged, and I love that. And I wish that there were more people who are studied food recipe developers who wouldn't mind channeling some of that towards creating innovative plant-based cuisine. So very grateful to Eric and his work. And thank you so much for joining me
Thanks for
today.
having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No,
thank you for having me.
Kitchen. It's great.
No, it's perfect.
Very intimate.
Eric's kitchen is literally perfect. Well, hopefully I'll be able to take some photographs of his kitchen is literally his apartment.
Yeah, sometimes I think that this studio is just like a work studio.
It's
has
wonderful.
a bed.
I feel like you should keep this.
I know. I was thinking about that too.
Just like keep it to work.
Get rich.
You know?
Yeah. Have like 2 places.
Come back and buy this place for like $2.1 million because
Yeah.
that's how much it would cost.
It's like a studio. I thought about that actually.
Yeah.
It's less of an apartment.
Well, I had so much fun eating and talking with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Eric. As you can see, there's a reason he's the star of the New York Times YouTube channel. If you did enjoy that episode, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button on whatever device you're watching or listening to this on, and leave a comment or a rating below. I'd also love it if you'd share this episode or any other episode you've really felt inspired by. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter as well for updates, giveaways, recipes, and insights. You can find a link to that below. Finally, until next week, have a wonderful and lovely day.